Hey heroes, and welcome to another vintage episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an event of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelate. The link is in the description below, along with other places you can find me. This week's tale really begins during the Second World War with the formation of a superhero team called the Invaders, named as such because they would invade Nazi-occupied countries to battle Hitler's forces. Formed near the end of 1941, this team included the original Captain America, Steve Rogers, a star-spangled super soldier who fought for liberty and justice, his young ally, James Buchanan Barnes, aka Bucky, a specially trained teenage operative who accompanied Cap on the majority of his missions, the original Human Torch, Jim Hammond, a lifelike android who could envelop himself in and manipulate fire, but sought to use this potentially destructive ability for good, Thomas Raymond, aka Toro the Flame Kid, a young superhuman who gained powers similar to those of the Torch and joined him as his partner in danger, and Namor the Submariner, the prideful prince of Atlantis who joined the war effort after Axis forces attacked his home. Of course, these were not the only heroes who fought on the side of the Allies, and in early 1942, after an incident in which the other invaders were captured and brainwashed by the Red Skull, Bucky Barnes assembled another team to save them, the Liberty Legion. Notable among them for today was Jeffrey Mace, aka The Patriot, an ordinary news reporter from Brooklyn who was inspired by Captain America and donned a colorful costume to fight foreign spies and domestic criminals. Robert Frank, aka The Whizzer, a costumed adventurer who gained superhuman speed after an injection of mongoose blood activated his latent mutant powers. And Madeline Joyce, aka Miss America, a woman from Washington, D.C. who gained superhuman strength and the ability to fly, which she used to find and defeat Axis saboteurs. The other members of the Liberty Legion that we won't really be talking about today include Red Raven, Jack Frost, the Thin Man, and the Blue Diamond. In his plan to save the invaders from the Red Skull, Bucky also enlisted the aid of the New York Yankees' young bat boy Fred Davis, who briefly impersonated Bucky to serve as a decoy. Of course, in the end, the invaders were freed from the Skull's brainwashing and returned to the European theater, while the Liberty Legion remained in America to defend their home front. Sometime after that, the invaders were joined by the British speedster Jacqueline Falsworth, aka Spitfire, and later her brother Brian Falsworth, who adopted the costumed identity of Union Jack, which was previously used by their father in the First World War. Another costumed crusader that we need to bring up is William Nasland, better known as the Spirit of 76. He was originally a library researcher from Philadelphia, but in 1940 he moved to Great Britain to join the Royal Air Force and fight against the Nazis. After a wound left him grounded and he was given an honorable discharge, Nasland donned a patriotic costume and bulletproof cape to become a masked adventurer, the Spirit of 76. In 1942, he and several other heroes were briefly manipulated into forming a group called the Crusaders and battling the Invaders, but even after that team disbanded, Nasland continued fighting for the Allies, earning him the respect of his peers. In early April 1945, as the war in Europe approached its endpoint, the Spirit of 76 even parachuted into Berlin alongside the Patriot and Captain America, helping Cap reach the Red Skull in what would prove to be their final wartime battle, as that mission ended with the Red Skull buried in rubble and presumed dead. Then, on April 12th, the U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt passed away, and the invaders were called back to London and given the news in person. Of course, Roosevelt was then succeeded by his vice president at the time, Harry S. Truman, who is another key player in today's drama. In the wake of all this, the invaders were divided into pairs and given separate assignments. Their British recruits, Spitfire and Union Jack, were sent to protect the Prime Minister Winston Churchill from Nazi assassins. Namor was sent alone to the Pacific Theater to defend Allied forces from Japanese submarines and kamikaze pilots. Captain America and Bucky were tasked with protecting an experimental drone plane which came under attack from the Nazi scientist Baron Heinrich Zemo. Of course, regular viewers may recall that the ensuing battle ended with both heroes missing and presumed dead, when the plane exploded above the North Atlantic, seemingly killing Bucky and throwing Captain America into the frigid waters below. The Human Torch and Toro, meanwhile, were sent to Berlin on a mission to capture Adolf Hitler alive, while the city was under siege from the Soviets. Suffice it to say, things didn't go as planned when Hitler threatened to destroy the city and everyone in it, German and Russian alike. Unwilling to let this happen, the Torch acted quickly, striking down the mad dictator and bringing his reign to a fiery end on April 30th, 1945. With the fall of Nazi Germany bringing the war in Europe to a close, the remaining invaders were called back to London and told that Captain America and Bucky were killed in action. Meanwhile, President Truman decided that the world still needed the two beloved heroes and selected William Nasland, the Spirit of 76, to take over the role of Captain America, while the FBI were tasked with recruiting a suitable Bucky. As it turns out, the one they found was none other than Fred Davis, the former Yankee Bat Boy who had impersonated Bucky well enough to fool the Red Skull once before. Truman then called the Torch, Toro, and Namor back to Washington, while the team's British members, Union Jack and Spitfire, remained in England, effectively leaving the team. The invaders not only learned that Nasland and Davis would be joining them as the new Captain America and Bucky, but that the former Liberty Legion members, the Whizzer and Miss America, had also been recruited, bringing their number back up to 7. Over the next several weeks, this version of the invaders fought against Japanese forces in the ongoing Pacific War, as well as domestic criminals and Nazi holdouts. While often working together, there were also many instances of them fighting individual battles, much like the previous incarnation of the team. Then, in August of 1945, the United States launched one of the most devastating displays of power in the history of warfare, detonating atomic bombs in the skies above the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On September 2, 1945, Japan signed the final document of unconditional surrender, and the long, bloody series of conflicts collectively known as World War II finally officially ended. In the wake of this momentous occasion, the United States no longer had need of invaders per se, but President Truman formally requested that the 7 heroes stay together as a team and work with the FBI to root out criminals and domestic threats. Furthermore, the president suggested a new moniker for the group, renaming them the All Winners Squad. Establishing a headquarters in Times Square, they continued their individual exploits, gathering together for threats that demanded a larger response. And the first notable foe they faced as a team during this era was a hooded madman known as Isbisa, who sought to steal one of America's atomic bombs for his own purposes. While unassuming in his civilian guise of Museum Secretary Simon Meek, Isbisa is by some accounts the first true villain of the atomic age, and in fact his name was an acronym for what he considered the ages of mankind: ice, stone, bronze, iron, steel, and atomic. As part of his schemes, Isbisa allied with 5 other criminals, providing them with plans and resources in exchange for a percentage of their stolen goods. Then, in 1946, Isbisa had his gangster beneficiaries conduct 5 elaborate crimes simultaneously, while intentionally gaining the attention of the All Winners Squad, and leaving for them clues that would point the heroes towards these crimes, with each one loosely referencing a different age. He also sowed confusion, leaving a fake clue implying that Namor was a co-conspirator of his. Annoyed by the insinuation, Namor took off to investigate the clue that had been left for him, while Toro followed after him. Naturally, the others then split up so that they could each investigate and tackle a different crime. Captain America and Bucky prevented a criminal gang, led by a man known simply as Porky, from stealing a Bronze Age statue from the Museum of Art. The Wizard stopped the Shut-Eye gang from stealing a hidden cache of gold from an antique locomotive, or Iron Horse as they were once called. The Human Torch helped policewoman Bobby Lee thwart a bank robbery attempt from gangster James Floor, who unsuccessfully tried to execute them with a giant fan that was normally used to stress test scale models of steel skyscrapers. Miss America tackled a villain known as the Calcium Master, who tricked people into believing that he had the power to turn others to stone by abducting a police chief from the town of Millstone and replacing him with a statue, all so that he could sell the supposed cure for an exorbitant amount. And Namor and Toro saved an indigenous trading post in the icy Bering Sea from a pirate known as Black Patch. Of course, these crimes were all meant to serve as a distraction, while Isbisa himself enacted his actual plan to steal atomic secrets and obtain a nuclear weapon. But the heroes completed their individual tasks far faster than Isbisa expected, and ultimately deduced his true goals, stopping him before he could succeed. Now, while all that was going on, the Human Torch's original creator, Professor Phineas Horton, attempted to bring life to a second synthetic man. In 1946, this resulted in the creation of an android that dubbed itself Adam 2, after the biblical Adam. Unlike the Torch, however, Adam 2 felt that synthetic life was superior to humanity and schemed to replace mankind. To this end, he held his own creator captive and began building more robots. While most were notably less sophisticated and lifelike than himself and the Torch, Adam also fashioned a machine capable of impersonating Horton. The Human Torch and Toro learned of Adam 2's existence and ambitions when they subsequently decided to visit Horton, but Adam 2 successfully lured the two flaming heroes into a trap, sealing them in a slowly filling water tank along with the Torch's captive creator. Leaving them to their fate, Adam 2 departed to begin the next phase of his plan, in which he would replace the up-and-coming politician John F. Kennedy with a robotic imposter. But before he was completely submerged in water, the captive Torch was able to set off a fire alarm that caught the attention of Jeffrey Mace, the Patriot, who just so happened to be nearby and came to their aid. Having overheard parts of the mad android's plan, Horton told the Patriot, Toro, and the Torch that Adam 2 intended on targeting a local politician, but didn't know who. The heroes quickly alerted the other All-Winners, and the team split up to search for the killer android. As luck would have it, it was William Nasland, Captain America, who found their target first and intervened, but in the ensuing battle, one of Adam 2's robot minions got the drop on Nasland, grabbing him from behind and crushing his ribs. Fatally injured, Nasland was unable to move, but succeeded in setting off a flare that alerted the others to the enemy's location. While the other All-Winners converged and saved Kennedy from Adam 2 and his robot minions, the Patriot investigated the source of the flare and found the dying Nasland. Listening to the fallen hero's final words, Jeff Mace learned Bill Nasland's name and vowed to honor his memory by taking up the mantle of Captain America. Donning one of Nasland's spare costumes, Mace quickly joined the battle and aided the other heroes. In the end, the All-Winners squad defeated their android opponent and were left to assume that their synthetic foe had seen some potential in JFK's political career that was not yet evident to them. In the wake of that incident, the heroes mourned the death of Bill Nasland, and Jeffrey Mace formally joined the All-Winners squad when the U.S. government asked him to continue operating as the third official Captain America. After that, the next major threat that the All-Winners encountered together was a menace who called himself the Future Man. Originating from a potential year 1 million AD in which the Earth was no longer fit for human life, he sought to eliminate mankind in the 20th century so that his own people could migrate to the past. To this end, he allied himself with a 20th century criminal known as Madam Death, claiming that she and her men would be among the few allowed to survive. Aided by Madam Death's international contacts, the Future Man began launching attacks around the globe, and naturally the All-Winners squad once again split up to foil these schemes. Captain America and Bucky traveled to Europe and stopped the spread of a deadly plague from the future. The Whizzer put an end to the use of a ray that slowed people's movements so dramatically that it caused traffic accidents and chaos across South America. Namor the Submariner prevented a torpedo-induced tidal wave from striking the coast of mainland China. Ms. America flew to Egypt and battled an army of living mummies that threatened to overrun the continent of Africa. And the Human Torch and Toro stopped an enormous man-made forest fire before it engulfed all of North America. Once each of these crises were dealt with, the All-Winners regrouped to launch a counter-offensive against the Future Man and Madam Death. In the ensuing battle, the two villains attempted to flee to the future, but Captain America sabotaged their controls, causing them to instead go even further into the past, but with no way to stop to menace anyone else. Meanwhile, another costumed adventurer who was active in 1946 was a woman named Louise Grant, who fought crime under the masked alias of the Blonde Phantom. Later that year, she allied herself with the All-Winners squad and was inducted into their ranks, joining them on a mission to stop a gangster named Dutch Rosenblatt from stealing an atomic weapon. That mission actually ended in failure, but only ironically, because the Blonde Phantom's future daughter, Wanda Mason, had traveled back in time with her ally, the She-Hulk, to steal the bomb in question for reasons that are complicated but ultimately altruistic. And suffice it to say, they stopped the bomb from actually being misused. After that debacle, the Blonde Phantom remained with the All-Winners for a time, at some point aiding them in another conflict with Isbisa, but evidently left at some point within the next several months. After that, in September of 1946, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover assigned a special agent, Betsy Ross, to serve as the team's government liaison. An accomplished counter-espionage agent who operated under various code names including X-13 and Agent R, Ross was one of the government's most trusted operatives since the early days of World War II, when she was involved with the super soldier program Operation Rebirth, and served a similar role for the original Captain America Steve Rogers. While things weren't nearly as hectic as they were during the war, the All-Winners squad continued to have scattered exploits throughout 1947. At some point in the late 40s, the team had an adventure involving the costumed vigilante known as the Angel, real name Thomas Halloway, the former Invader Brian Falsworth, aka Union Jack, and his partner Roger Aubrey, who at the time was known as the Destroyer. During that meeting, Aubrey was inspired by the All-Winners, but wanted to create a superhero team that operated on an international scale. Meanwhile, Betsy Ross and Jeff Mace grew close, as did the Whizzer and Ms. America, and in early 1948 the team started planning to move their headquarters into the Baxter Building, which was still under construction at the time. Then, however, on Jeff Mace's birthday in April of that year, he and Fred Davis, in their roles of Captain America and Bucky, intervened in an attempted jewel heist being carried out by a gangster known as Lavender, real name Lenora Moore. By all accounts, this should have been a fairly routine crime stopping, but in the ensuing battle, Lavender shot Davis square in the chest. Davis was left hospitalized and in critical condition, and Mace blamed himself, insisting that he go after Lavender's gang alone. However, he was ultimately aided by Betsy Ross, who donned the Spirit of 76's old bulletproof cape and put together a masked identity of her own, becoming known as Golden Girl. After that whole incident, Mace realized that while the other All-Winners were superhumans capable of saving the world, his time would be better spent protecting the streets from violent criminals like Lavender or Dr. Satan. As such, he decided to officially resign from the team and instead continued to fight crime alongside Golden Girl, taking her under his wing. It seems, however, that this was the beginning of the end for the All-Winners squad. In early 1949, the Human Torch and Toro attempted to take down a crime syndicate they'd been tracking, but were lured into a trap and doused with a chemical agent that rendered both of them immobile. The Torch was buried in a deep hole in the Nevada desert, while Toro was sold to the North Korean government. By this point, the remaining members of the All-Winners squad were more occupied with their individual exploits than team adventures, and so in 1949 the group officially disbanded. After that, the Submariner returned to Antarctic Atlantis, where he was born, and stayed there for several years. The Whizzer and Miss America, meanwhile, married in 1949, and while they retired their superhero identities, they nonetheless continued working as superhuman government agents as Bob and Madeline Frank. Several months later, a nuclear project they were assigned to protect was sabotaged by their old foe, Isbisa. The superhuman couple were able to prevent a meltdown, exposing themselves to radioactive elements in the process, unaware that Madeline was pregnant at the time. The couple survived, but when Madeline later gave birth, her son, Robert Frank Jr., began emitting dangerous levels of radiation. As a result, Robert Jr., later known as Nucleo, had to be sealed away in suspended animation for decades. As for Fred Davis, he survived his near-fatal gunshot wound, but was left noticeably weakened. He hoped to recover enough to return to the role of Bucky, but then there was an incident in which he was abducted by a criminal known as the Trickster, real name Milo Van Set, who had figured out Davis's connection to Captain America. During that conflict, Davis donned his costume one final time, and despite his inability to move the way he once did, he was able to help Mace defeat the Trickster, coating his captor in flammable oil so that Captain America could threaten him into surrender with a simple match. After that, Davis was left permanently reliant on a walking cane to move around and forced to retire from superheroics entirely, although he also continued to work for the government in other capacities. Betsy Ross, meanwhile, continued operating both as Golden Girl and as Captain America's government liaison, but the following year, in 1950, she was officially reassigned to the FBI's Glendale Annex on Long Island, New York, putting an end to her costumed exploits. Jeff Mace continued in the role of Captain America for several months, with Fred Davis stepping in as his new liaison, but the FBI grew increasingly wary of using him against organized crime, since his presence typically provoked a larger response than usual. After further disagreements with his superiors, Mace ultimately retired from the role of Captain America and later married Betsy Ross, with whom he lived a peaceful suburban life in Glendale. Returning to his journalistic roots, Mace then founded his own newspaper, the Glendale Gazette, and later became an editor for the Daily Bugle. Meanwhile, in 1951, the Destroyer, Roger Aubrey, officially activated his own team, the V Battalion, which he named after a group of partisan freedom fighters from World War II. Numerous individuals were involved with this covert effort, including the former All-Winners members Bob and Madeline Frank, and Fred Davis. In 1953, the buried Human Torch was awakened by an atomic test in the Nevada desert. He briefly clashed with his old friend Toro, who had been brainwashed by the North Korean government, but he ultimately succeeded in freeing Toro's mind, and the two had more adventures together over the next 2 years. In late 1955, however, as a long-term effect of the radiation he'd absorbed in the blast that awakened him, the Torch's powers began to flare out of control. Not wanting to cause undue harm, the Torch buried himself deep beneath the earth, deactivating himself in the process, effectively entering a state of hibernation. With his best friend seemingly gone for good, Toro lost heart in superheroics and retired. He eventually married a woman named Anne and also settled down to live a quiet suburban life. The Submariner also had further exploits in the 1950s, but by the end of that decade an encounter with a villainous telepath, Paul Destine, aka Destiny, had left Namor amnesiac, and he wandered the streets of New York for years with no knowledge of who he was. In 1958, Robert and Madeline Frank were expecting their second child and traveled to Mount Wundagore in Transia, where they sought medical assistance from the geneticist Herbert Wyndham, better known as the High Evolutionary. Despite this effort, the childbirth was difficult and traumatic, and Madeline died mere moments after delivering a stillborn son. In the wake of that tragedy, the midwife Bova presented to Robert Frank two other infants in her care, Wanda and Pietro, claiming that the twins were his. However, Bob was crushed by the death of his wife and ran off, disappearing into the night. His memories clouded by trauma, the former hero vanished completely from the public eye, and over the following years he simply wandered the world in a daze. Of course, he eventually resurfaced decades later during the Marvel Age, as did Namor, the Human Torch, and Toro, each of them having aged slowly, or not at all in the Torch's case, due to their unique physiologies. But by that point, the All-Winners squad had become little more than a footnote in the annals of history. A post-war superhero team that was only really active for a handful of adventures in the latter half of the 1940s, and whose most famous members are better known for other exploits. Still, while their name may have been campy, they did save the world on more than one occasion, proving that when the right people come together, sometimes they really can all be winners. Alright heroes, that's all I've got for you this week, but thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. That being said, if there's anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!